all this week at 8 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN.
Now, a discussion on the future of the European Union. It happened last month at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. The current chair of the European Union, who is also Sweden's Minister of Foreign Affairs, took part in this 1-hour, 10-minute discussion. Some of the topics discussed: the common currency, known as the euro, and a proposed European Defence Force.
As an introduction to our debate, I would like to summarize the conclusion of a session which was held this morning between commissioners and business leaders. And the subject was the Europe of your dream, the view of business. And though business leaders spoke about competitivity, regulation, education, they spoke above all about politics. And their message was crystal clear. Europe today lacks leadership, vision, communication. There was a severe disappointment with the results of Nice. There was, above all, an agreement between business leaders that the time had come for a clarification debate. As someone said, the good news about Nice is that nearly everybody is somewhere frustrated and dissatisfied. There is a call for more Europe, even if there is confusion as to what Europe should be. For political reasons, and mainly because European leaders are losing European citizens, we cannot afford to delay any longer a debate as to the content on what Europe should be. It is not only a problem of marketing. It is not only a question of insufficient explanation. How can you brand a product which is not clear? What can we do to bridge the gap between real Europe, which is doing very well, and institutional Europe, which is doing relatively poorly? And this, in many ways, is an understatement. Can we remain in the ambiguousness in which we live now, applying the French formula, you come out of ambiguity at your own expense? Or, as the reverse become true? We should, at the risk of disagreement, open a debate on fundamentals. To debate these issues, we have, right now, 4 panelists. Mrs. Anna Lindh, who is the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Sweden, Mr. Poul Nyrup Rasmussen, who is the Prime Minister of Denmark, Mr. Rodrigo de Rato y Figueiredo, who is Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Economy of Spain, and Peter Sutherland, Chairman and Managing Director of Goldman Sachs International and Chairman of British Petroleum Amoco. All of them, including Peter Sutherland, will discuss political matters. And we'll start with Anna Lindh, not because you are a woman, but because you are the chair of the European Union. Mrs. Lindh.
Thank you. So first of all, I don't know how to interpret the fact that neither Germany nor France could make it for this debate. But I think we have to manage without, even if I can understand that some of you who came here are a bit disappointed. So, United States of Europe, or a United Europe of States, was the title. My brief answer would be that I think European Union is and will continue to be a mixture of both of it. Sweden has now the priority for the European Union, and we will be in the presidency for the coming 6 months in the European Union. Enlargement is our first and main priority. When we have been discussing enlargement, we've sometimes heard that enlargement is supposed to be contradictory to the deepening of European Union and to the integration. I would say that that is not at all true. I don't not believe that enlargement and integration are opposite to each other. I think on the opposite, on the contrary, that new member states may also add new dimensions. And just think some years back or some decades back, if we would have been discussing with the 6 founders that some decades later the European Union would have 15 members and at the same time be covering so many new areas, so many new issues of cooperation, I think they would have been laughing. They wouldn't have believed that that would be possible with 15 members. And I think we have to strive for enlargement and integration to continue to go hand in hand. One important debate, which will also start during the Swedish presidency in the European Union, is the discussion on the future of Europe. I'm sorry Pierre Moscovici wasn't here and could tell you a little bit more about Nice and the Nice agreement. But one of the conclusions in Nice was that we should already now start the discussion of the future of Europe before the next IGC, Intergovernmental Conference, will take place in 2004. And I think we have now, the task was given to Sweden and Belgium as the 2 incoming presidencies, together with the Commission and the Parliament, to launch this debate. And I think we have a very specific time when we now know that we really do have time for some years to have a broad public debate about the future of the European Union before we have to institutionalize before the next IGC. So we will have a couple of years where we can really try to involve as many citizens as possible, universities, NGOs, students, and so on. And I think that is crucial for also anchoring the European Union among the citizens. Often we can hear that the Swedes are Eurosceptics. We have a lot of Euroscepticism in the North and in Britain. But unfortunately, I would say that I think we do have a problem. And as one of the Swedes very positive to the European Union, I will also say that I'm afraid we have problems in many countries. And I think we can see that in the low turnout in the European elections. We have to have a broader anchorage of the European Union among the European citizens. And I don't think the key factor is the institutions. I think the key factor is the issues. European citizens should feel that the issues discussed are relevant, it's important problems, and European Union debate would add more value. It would mean added value to the national debate about the problems discussed. I think one important issue will be the common values. Because if there is anything Europe can also contribute with today, I think it's the discussion about the values which we share. And when we can see that we have a global economy, global information system, global migration, we also have to have more of common global values, also to balance the global economy. And then, to end with the first question again, the United States of Europe or United Europe of States. As I said, I think we've seen in the past that what we have had developed is really both the intergovernmental and the supranational way of working. And I think we will continue to have a mixture of both of it. In some areas, like the internal market, we will of course continue to have the supranational, and where decisions have to be taken above our heads, above the head of the national state, to be able to have a functioning way of going forward. But in other fields, in new areas of cooperation, like the one we've started on employment, it is very positive also to try to have a more of an intergovernmental work with benchmarking, peer pressure, and so on, to try to form the goals together, the aims together, but then try to let every country find the best way to achieve the goals.
Thank you very much. Prime Minister Rasmussen.
Yes, thank you so much. I would like to also to be as concrete as I can. First of all, may I say to business that Europe is better than Europe's rumor. My point? Well, if you faced the European situation in 1993, you had a Europe consisting of countries which nearly all of them have deficits and high unemployment. Deficits on their public accounts, high unemployment. Now you have a European situation with surplus, and high employment rate relatively in all the states. Two, you have an economic convergence policy today covering all the 15 countries, which have implied in the past 8 years a much higher degree of responsibility, let me say that, in economic policy. May I say that we should have had in 1974 and 1979 our experiences and recognition of what to do in crisis situation as we have today. Imagine if we knew how to tackle oil prices crisis in the 70s. We would not today have to grapple with that many million unemployment people in Europe as we have to do. Because if you look at the figures, you will see that the increase in unemployment in Europe started at that time, and started in the 70s because we did not learn in the 70s how to grapple with cross-nationwide economic problems. We all try to solve our problems on national egoistic basis by cutting down our exchange rates to the neighbor, cutting down our public deficits or our public expenditures, with one consequence, that our economic crisis in Europe became even deeper. Today, I may say that even if we will see turbulence on the energy market in the years to come, even if we will see, I hope not, but even if we will see it, relatively higher oil prices than we would wish to, then we would be able to tackle it due to our discipline in our economic policy now, which we have never had before. So that is message number 2. Message number 3 is Nice. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think it's a disappointing result. It was a dramatic result, I admit that. I could have wished that we reached what we got for a little bit later, a little bit earlier than we did. It was relatively late in the morning when we agreed. But what did we came to Nice for? We came to Nice to solve these outstanding problems which was necessary to solve so that the enlargement process could go on, and that we would be prepared in 2003 to have done our homework. And we did solve that problem. You could always discuss the performance characters, but I'm talking about the results. We solved it. We have one outstanding problem, that is, how should we organize the Commission when we become 27 members? But I think it's fair to say that all 27 members should participate in this decision process at that time, when it will come. Then to the future, there's much rhetorics in our European dialogue. And my first wish will be, please come down. The day will be really wished from ordinary people that we could talk about Europe in a more relaxed way, without using too much rhetorics, and instead talking much more concrete. What are we up to? 3 points. 1, making the enlargement come true in a successful way. 2, forming the best answers to the globalization. 3, the aim of ensuring a European Union for the people. Let me comment briefly upon these 3 future issues. 1, enlargement. I think that Nice did deliver what we could and should deliver at this time. Secondly, now we have to explain to our people this is a win-win situation. Many people in Europe fear that when the newcomers are becoming member of the European Union, we'll have to pay. But I assure you, for the business people and for our society, it will become a win-win situation. I can see enormous prosperities and possibilities for economic growth and for business chances and opportunities in the new coming member states. It will be a positive contribution to our economic growth rates and to our employment in Europe, I'm quite sure. And we should do our utmost. And we should develop at the top of that the Russian partnership. And I hope really that we will be engaged in grappling and tackling the Russian partnership in such a way that Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland And the whole group of new coming member countries will come together with a strengthened partnership with Russia, not a lessened one. Thirdly, forming the best answers to the globalization. Let me mention 5 short points, which have to do with European leadership. 1, the WTO. I think that the European Union have to insist on taking her responsibility of a true leadership and responsibility on the WTO. It went wrong last time, let's admit it, due to a lack of preparation, due to lack of understanding of the real conflict of interest between Europe, United States, and the Third World. We have been clever now, and if we prepare the WTO round in fair, open, and realistic basis, I think we have good chances. And coupled to that, we have still a lot of work to do on the single market, but we have made good progress. Secondly, the G7, G8 meetings on the financial market. I think that one of the messages which came out of the Davos meeting here have been there is costly velocity and less costly velocity, but we could all wish a lesser velocity on our financial market than we have seen. Also here, I think that the European Union could play a constructive role of transparency, of standard claims and good behavior on banking systems, on mutual exchange of information in a rapid rate. We have to play a role here in the G7, G8 concept on financial market. Thirdly, environmental. I think that the European Union must take a leading role on the follow-up of the Kyoto. We have not lost, but we have to continue, and we have to continue the debate and the agenda. Fourthly, responsibility as far as crisis management is concerned. I hope that as soon as possible we can regain a dialogue with the United States on crisis management. That we do not see each other as contradictory partners, but as mutual, respectful, and dialogue partners, and real partners. I'm convinced that the European security and defense policy is not in contradiction with our alliance, but is an enormous, fruitful supplement. Lastly, international crime. I think that the European Union could play a predominant role in good cooperation with Asia and United States and developing world to make us all better of combating professional international crime. Last point, people in Europe. I would warn to take this issue too easy. One can easily say, well, Prime Minister of Denmark, what are you talking about? You just lost a referendum. Yes, I did. I admit that. But let me just pose you one simple question. If you thought about having referendums in your countries in Europe, what would be your honest guess? If you had a referendum on the euro in Germany, for instance, well, you know the answer yourself. What my point is it's not wrong to have referendums. In my mind and in our tradition, it is a true part of democracy. But what is wrong is that we have not yet developed an open, transparent, and direct dialogue with the people. And we have to take the consequences of that. Let me give you 4 simple examples. I think we can do a good job in the next 4 years to come. We did conclude in Nice that we should have a new intergovernmental conference. We should start at it in the year 2004. Well, we have 3 years, 3.5 now. Let's use them to have this dialogue. And let me mention just 4 concrete points again. 1, can we make a more simple and easily understandable text of our treaty? Is that at all possible? We have tried it that many times, and I know that all the juridical expertise will say that is not possible, Paul. But could we give it a chance one more time? I think we should. Secondly, can we make the European Union more transparent? I know it's difficult, but I think we should, and I'm sure we can. Thirdly, and this is really important, can we make clearer and wiser work-sharing lines between what should be solved at the European level and what should rest to the national state? I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, this is the corner of the debate, because many, many ordinary people, I'm not talking about the well-educated, international-oriented people, I'm talking about ordinary people. which in a certain sense fear the globalization. You have heard the demonstrators up there, that's not them I'm talking about. I'm talking about ordinary people, which ask themselves, do I have a chance in the future? What about my children and grandchildren? Am I educated well? Can I be sure that my children can manage in the international competition? And will we not risk that the European Union will take too much apart from my national state? Now, I think that if we can come out with measures saying two simple things. There's not any contradiction between market economy and good political vision and decision. This is not a contradiction. A market economy with a human face is not a contradiction. It's a precondition to obtain a better understanding and live in an interface between ordinary people and Brussels and all the central decision center. Secondly, I think that what we did decide in Lisbon last year during the Portuguese presidency was of utmost importance to the people. We said, there's not a contradiction between a high competitiveness from the European states and the European Union on the one hand, and the welfare state on the other hand. It's a question of modernization. It's a question of intelligent economic policy. It's a question of systematic reform process. But as such, you do not decrease your competitive force by having a high social security. On the contrary, my experience in my country is that we have not got AAA in international credit evaluation without working hard to obtain it. But in my country, you have this high competitiveness, high mobility on the labor market, because people know that if they miss the chance when they try a new job or a new education, they are not failed forever. They have another chance. They could start again on a new educational process, on a new job, without losing their lives. Last point that should be that was Anna Lindh's point about common values. I think that we have a good chance to obtain a definition of common values, and I would really mention to you that the list and the treaty, the Charter about Fundamental Rights, which we decided as a political paper in Lisbon, should be lifted now to perhaps an integrated part of a new treaty. Why not discuss it? I know it's difficult from a juridical point of view, but I think that we have come to a time now where we have to discuss these common values in a good manner. Finally, do we have a trend going for a United States of Europe or a United Europe of States? I think, as Anna, that the answer is pragmatic. But if I should give an answer, I would say the trend is going, as far as I can see it, to a United Europe of States with a high capability of solving the common problems we could not solve ourselves, and a high degree of acting, empowering to act, and to play this leading role also in global economics, as I think we could. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rodrigo Di Drato Figueiredo.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I think that the debate regarding the political integration of Europe will always be moving between two basic principles of European integration. One is subsidiarity, and the other is integration. And I don't think that will change very much in the future. And of course, it has to do with the fact that nation states are important in this process. But I'm not sure that that's what the common man, and I think that the people who are inside this room and the people who are outside are as common as one and the others, is very much moved by intergovernmental conferences. I don't think so. I think that, as Ms. Lindh said very clearly, what people are moved and what people have an opinion is about issues, and the issues are usually related to their problems. And at least in Spain, but my limited experience of other European countries tells me that it's the same, discussions about superstructural political matters are not what people are worried about, or are not what people are moved about. We know what people are moved about. They move about quality of jobs, they move about quality of life, they move about environmental issues, they move about the future, and they want to know if Europe is an answer for that. And I found somehow striking that what to me is probably the most important single issue of political integration of the last 10 years in the European history, which is the euro, has not even been mentioned up to now. I could understand politically why, but if I am the third speaker, but the first of a euro country, let me devote a little bit of time to that. Probably nothing more powerful, or at least you would not find many things as powerful as currency, national currency, monetary policy, interest rates, mortgage rates, something that people will touch, will buy, will sell as a currency. And we have a European currency. We have a single European currency. It's true that not all European countries are in it, but that doesn't mean that that's not a big force of integration, and not only economic integration, but political integration. I'm sure that the young people of today who will live in a Europe of euros, that will move from the south of Spain to the northern countries with the same currency, will find and will define a different Europe. And I think that the successful of the important force of integration, that is the single currency, the euro, is going to be very important and very decisive for European people to believe in future integration. Sometimes it seems like we don't want to discuss what we are doing, and we'd rather discuss future issues. And I think that the people are realizing that. Europe has a lot of things right now in its hands that should be discussed. One of them, of course, is monetary integration. The other has been already mentioned, is enlargement, generosity with enlargement, and reality with enlargement. And I think that's one of the big challenges ahead of us, much more than an intergovernmental conference that will probably be as Nice, 5 days and nights discussing to come out to a rough balance that the ones who were inside decide is very important, and the journalists decide that is not important. But I'm not sure that that really, at the end of the day, makes too much of a difference. We have to speak about how it's going to be a Europe with more Europeans inside of it, and I think that is understood and backed by most of the people. And we also have to speak to the common man, pro-globalization or anti-globalization, how we're going to solve their problems in a European manner. Employment, social security, pensions, education, health, certainly fight against crime, as Prime Minister Rasmussen was saying. And there are a lot of issues right now that we know that people are not happy with. Europe has a structural unemployment rate of 9%, which is exactly the double of the structural unemployment rate of the United States. And that is certainly an issue that people would like to know. And I'm not coming from a country that can give too many lessons on that, because we have the highest unemployment rate, but we are also the ones who are reducing it faster. Of course, one thing probably comes with the other, but we know what is, at least we know what one should not do, and we're finding out what is the ways to solve the problem. Certainly, for the past 3-4 years, labor reform, welfare reform are words that are taboo in the political discussion in Europe. And I think that's a big mistake, because that's what the issues that people are really wanted to hear about, because they know they're true. European values. Of course, they're European values. We have very clear different values than other parts of the world. And we should be able to defend them not only inside our countries, but internationally. there should be a more clear role of Europe in international matters, starting but one that has been already mentioned, which is WTO. I think that Europe should be able to show that it's willing to open its frontiers to trade. That is true that our agricultural policies are difficult politically, domestically, very difficult for all of us. But it's also true that we want to be part of the growth of Asia, the growth of Latin America, the growth of the Mediterranean countries. And I think, and I have the impression that right now we're not able to deliver that message. And I think that's something that we should also bring to the political debate in Europe. And of course, the year 2001, I think that it's a very important challenge for Europe. As you all probably have heard during these Davos meetings, the question is not so much if the US is going to have a recession or a hard landing. The question is who will take the lead for the next months and for the next year. Should Europe be the one? Why not? It's true that our convergence situation is the best in years. It's true that our inflation, growth, public deficit are the best in years, but it's not yet true that people, European people and the rest of the world people, believe that Europe could grow for 3, 4, 5, 6 years in a row. That, I think, is the big challenge of Europe in world matters, to be intelligent and generous, to open its trade and to be a leader on that, and also to show that the European model is a model of growth, a model of unemployment, and also a model of solidarity. So in that respect, I don't give too much, I don't think that the people who are going to be involved in institutional debates are going to be very popular. I think that there has to be institutional debates, and somebody has to do it, and there has to be a way to decide inside Europe, and we have to define it. And it's going to be probably always a little bit frustrating. Well, there are some electoral systems in other parts of the world that are also frustrating, and I mean, nobody is saying that that doesn't mean they're not important. So those issues are going to be always complicated. But there are other issues more important politically that I think is the one that should be addressed and the ones that will move people. And just to end, I think that, backing a little bit from my own argument, I think there is an institutional question in Europe that is losing momentum and should take more momentum, which is the role of the Commission. I think the role of the Commission, after the criticism of Parliament in 1999 and the fall of that Commission, is in a crisis that has not been surmounted. And I think the Commission is the force that should take more rhythm in the next few months and the next few years, the force that is going to be essential for European changes, and the force that is going to be essential, certainly, for the challenge of the enlargement. But at the same time, I think that if we look backwards a little bit, not just 20 years, but 5 years, I certainly agree with Prime Minister Rasmussen that Europeans, we might not be proud, but we should be confident that we are able to move forward. Thank you.
Peter?
Yes, well, let me start by making the fundamental statement of belief that the European Union as a political ideal is the most noble political ideal that we have seen develop on this continent in 1,000 years. It involves the sharing of sovereignty between peoples, long divided, which were a cockpit of conflict for centuries. And we have a huge responsibility to see that it develops. Secondly, enlargement of the European Union is a moral imperative. We are obliged to enlarge, but we are equally obliged to do so without destroying the very edifice that those who wish to join intend to join. And therefore, for me at least, the institutional issues are of fundamental importance. We're on a journey to an undefined destination. It's an undefined destination that probably cannot be defined. But it is to gradually bring us closer together, and to do so in a spirit which requires magnanimity and the defeat of the most irredentist attitudes of nationalism, which have created difficulties for us for so long. And it is that belief in sharing sovereignty that I believe underlies the lack of confidence and belief that was evident in the discussion amongst businessmen today following Nice. Because it did not seem to rise to the challenge. It's easy to say that as a non-participant, and one concedes the difficulties. The achievements have been enormous. In a few short decades, we've free movement of people, goods, services, and capital. In some ways, more advanced even than in the United States, believe it or not, for an example, in financial services. We have created, when many thought it impossible, a single currency, which we believe in and which will work. We now have to deal with the institutional framework. Sui generis, I agree. Maintaining in certain areas, for an example, culture, the separate identities that makes our diversity ultimately cohesive. But we also have to rise to challenges. Last weekend, Chancellor Schroeder in Berlin characterized a debate between intergovernmentalism and supranational authority. Difficult words, complex, and as Minister Ratto said, something that probably goes over the head of many. But for me, at least, it involves a couple of basic principles. What's different about the European Union is the supremacy of European law over national law in the areas where it applies. And secondly, the capacity to make those laws. And with a community of 30 nations, we need more, not more confusion, but more majority voting. We need more progress in the area of developing decision-making capacities than we have got. And for many, the confusion of Nice is a confusion related to ambition that did not go far enough in majority voting, to the marginalization, and I agree completely with what has been said about the Commission, the marginalization of the Commission by the member states. The Commission has been the heart and soul of a process that is contrary to intergovernmentalism. The community method has always been that we have a functioning entity which puts the common interest above national interest. And that means that the proposals for new legislation, new laws, and change should come in the common interest, not from the capitals, who will always fight their corner, as is their duty to their own electorates. We have seen since Maastricht how the intergovernmentalist tendency has developed. Foreign policy and security. We have created a hybrid, a very excellent man, Javier Solana, but outside the Commission, in some way answerable to a directoire at the end of the day of member states, not advancing policies in the common interest. He's trying to, but it's not working effectively, and it's very difficult. And it was clear from his statement made in the last week that that is the case. The same with home affairs and security. We have seen also the development, to some extent at least, however inevitable it may appear, of a two-speed Europe, one that probably has to advance even further, where we have some in and some out of issues like the common currency. Now that's inevitable in my view. Flexibility now exists, but we have to be very cautious about an avant-garde, which I agree is a necessary and desirable thing to proceed with an open door to those who will follow later, but not creating a pick and choose Europe where you can be in one policy and out of another on a whole-scale basis. So for me at least, and I hope and I think I'm reflecting the views because I was at that meeting this morning of business, the sense of concern may not be one rooted in a detailed knowledge of the complexities of qualified majority voting, but it recognizes that, for an example, in the WTO, there wouldn't be a WTO today if Europe didn't speak with one voice, one of the few areas where, in trade at least, it was able to do so. In areas like services and intellectual property, there was some compromise on this in Nice to extend this voice, but with great difficulty. Qualified majority voting, it seems to me to be even more complicated, and in many ways makes it easier to achieve a blocking minority than it did before Nice. Introduces a new double majority which requires 72% of the votes and requires that the qualified majority represents at least 62% of the EU's population. The whole thing becomes more and more confusing and difficult. Now, I go back to what I started with. I appreciate that it's very easy for the hurler on the ditch, as we say in our country, to make comments about difficult political compromises and the difficulty of bringing the people of Europe with us. But let me conclude by saying that it is deeply disappointing that such a noble idea, which should have such an enormous attraction to the peoples of Europe, is not gaining the force and strength that it should have. And if it hasn't got that force and strength, when it palpably should have, in my view, it must be a question of the expression of what we are and the selling of what we are. So I believe we need more supranationalism, not less. I don't believe that we will ever create a homogenized Esperanto-speaking European. I will always be what I am, and everybody on this table and everybody in this hall who's a European will remain what they are. We will retain our separate areas and responsibilities. But I would like to see, I must say, a more ambitious attempt to develop common policies in areas such as those which I've mentioned, to extend majority voting, and to accept that the challenge of enlargement to up to 30 or more members has not been met. A great deal remains to be done, and I don't think that it can be put off until after enlargement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. It's easier to be more enthusiastic about Europe when you don't have governmental responsibilities.
I think I made that point a couple of times, Dominic, but thank you for reminding me of it.
That seems the first lesson. The second lesson is that among those responsible, there was a remarkable consensus. So it may mean two things. Either the press got it completely wrong, has misread what's happening in Europe, or the recipe for success and consensus is the exclusion of the French, the German, and the British from the debate. That would be, and of course, the weather has made that possible. We have 30 minutes for our debate. It is open. Please introduce yourself and be brief. We want questions. Yes, please.
As part of the press that gets it wrong, I'd appreciate your comment on two things. One, the declining support for EU membership in some of the states which are trying hardest to get in, like Poland. It's still there, but it is gone down. And also the mixed feelings which are clearly in Western Europe towards enlargement. Do you feel that the enlargement really is as inevitable and that the timetable is one you can stick to or needs to be accelerated?
I absolutely think it's inevitable, and I think it's extraordinarily important that we stick to the timetable or even try to accelerate. And the reason is that, I mean, in so many candidate countries, they have really done extraordinary efforts to try to meet the demands and the requests of the European Union. And if they do not feel that their efforts are rewarded in a proper way and that they are not coming closer to the Union, they might have a severe backlash for European Union in their countries. And then I think it's really also a responsibility for us, because these are new democracies, and sometimes we tend to behave as they had been democracies as well for decades and decades and decades. But I think we should remember that they are sometimes new and quite fragile democracies. Not fragile any longer, but they can have severe problems, and then we have to really make whatever is possible to make their process as smooth as possible. And that doesn't mean that they are not supposed to fulfill the demands from the European Union, but when they are doing their homework, we should do our homework and really make them negotiate on their own merits, and when they are ready, they should also be allowed to enter the Union. That means as well that I'm totally opposed to so-called Big Bang theory, when almost all of the candidate countries would enter at the same time, because that would mean that those who have made the biggest efforts trying to be ahead of the others will have to wait for the others, and that I think wouldn't be a good signal from the European Union.
Thank you. Yes, please.
I'm Bob Torricelli. I'm an American senator representing the state of New Jersey and a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. I was very moved by Mr. Sutherland's comments about the European Union, and for all the reasons that I thought his eloquent portrayal was important, I wanted to raise the issue the Prime Minister raised about the European Defense Force, which I think is not simply a bad idea. I think it is a dangerous idea, because it is a contradiction of all the things that made the European Union so important, the centuries of understanding how to bring European unity and contradict its history. I think the two most important things about the European Defense Force to recognize is that it is neither European nor much of a defense force. It is bringing a new combination of states together within Europe, not including all of Europe, into a military alliance. How other states in Europe or beyond react to that in the future, we have no idea. But it is unlikely to be positive. Worse, it is too small militarily to have any effectiveness other than create rivalries. And worse for us, incredibly, it is based on the notion of European soldiers having access to American transport capabilities, which there is virtually no chance would ever be made available. It appears to me that all the enthusiasm my country's had for the European Union, we justifiably have some concerns about this. The rivalries, whether it has capabilities, and what it does to NATO. There is a great saying, I think, in all of our countries, at least in mine, if something is broken, you do not fix it. There is nothing in a military alliance that has ever been more successful than NATO. I don't know what the consequences will be for NATO, but they cannot be positive. And I think it is a subject that I'm glad the Prime Minister raised, because it is worthy of mention, and I'd appreciate your reactions.
Who's going to give a European answer to this moderate expression of reserve vis-à-vis the project?
Well, I'm more than willing. From our point of view, we are not of the opinion that the European defense concept should be not only against NATO, but also outside NATO. That might not be the opinion of all the European countries, but certainly is the Spanish position. And we, for a long time inside NATO, there's been this concept of the European pillar, which has been completely accepted in NATO security concepts. And that's where we think that our concept of defense should be developed, but not at all damaging what is called the Atlantic link. So in that respect, I could understand your reasoning, but I think that it's extreme and not real, at least from the Spanish point of view.
Peter, would you?
Well, I would simply say this. Since the very beginning of the European Union, the most forceful protagonist for European integration has been the United States. And they've been absolutely right. And I think that the balance of opinion in the United States, insofar as one has been able to follow it, even on this issue, has been much more positive, with due respect, Senator, than your contribution might have suggested. It's obviously necessary and desirable for Europe, in certain circumstances, to have a capacity, not in any antagonistic way vis-à-vis the United States, But there could well be circumstances, and they're regularly debated in the United States, as to whether the United States could or should be involved under certain circumstances in peacekeeping operations in Europe and so on. I don't see this in any way as an antagonism. The relationships between Europe and the United States are far too profound, far too important for either of us to risk that. And as far as I know, everything that has been said by Minister Ratto is the common view held by Europeans. I've never heard the argument advanced that this is in some way an act of antagonism, and I believe that the United States will see it in that light. I hope so.
Annelien?
Yeah, having taken part in all the meetings, also preparing for the security and defense policy, I would just like to say that I agree with the previous speaker, and that is really the point of the European Union, not only of Spain or my other friends here at the table. I mean, and we have been very clear that, so I think there is sometimes a misunderstanding, because we have been very clear that NATO and the EU are two autonomous organizations, but there is in no way any rivalry between them. What European Union is preparing to do is really to be more active in crisis management, and that has also been a request from the US, that at least when it is smaller crisis, we should be able to deal with it more on ourselves. But of course, when it's some kind of bigger problem and bigger crisis, we will have the cooperation, coordination with the US and with NATO as we had before. And this is really not the EU defense, it's the EU crisis management. And I think that has been as clear also for the NATO allies in the EU as it has been for countries not members of NATO, like Sweden. So I think your fears are exaggerated in this field.
Well, it looks as if Europeans will have to accept NMD and Americans will have to accept what we are doing on security terms. That would be the base for mutual surrender to each other if we want to stay together. Who wants to raise a question? I don't see you, but yes, please.
My name's Lionel Barber from the Financial Times. I wanted to challenge the prevailing opinion on the panel, with the exception of Peter Sutherland, that in Anna Lindh's words, it's about issues, not institutions. Does the panel actually not think that beyond the question of employment or globalization, the question of the public's confidence in the legitimacy of European institutions is actually a decisive issue? And is it not time for Europe to address the question of, for example, that the Council of Ministers, which is a decision-making body, meets in total secrecy and private when it's passing a law, or whether you have a situation where the European Parliament, which is taking an increasing role in determining the outcome of European legislation, is actually not really seen as a parliament. It has different electoral laws, and where you have also a European Central Bank that has the power to influence economic conditions in the Eurozone, tremendous power, but where you have not had, for example, a popular referendum in most of the member states on the euro. So I would just ask whether we aren't actually missing fundamentally the question of legitimacy.
Why don't we start with someone who had a referendum? Prime Minister.
Well, let me start by saying I can easily follow my colleague here when you had your intervention before about institutions and popular engagement by ordinary people. I think that what we should concentrate upon now is to see things as they are. Let me tell you also to Peter Sutherland, when you're asking for more qualified majority, I would say there is a good argument for it. For instance, on taxation. I could easily wish that we could have had qualified majority votings on minimum rules of, for instance, corporate taxation in Europe or environmental taxation, to avoid intergovernmental competition on who could diminish the corporate taxation mostly so that we risk a competition between us which is not political controllable. Understand me correctly. I could foresee that having qualified majority in these areas would be okay for me. But you have to recognize at the same time, Peter Sutherland, that these 15 countries are different countries. Some of them are prepared, others are not prepared. My experience in the 25 years we have been member of the European community is that we start by unanimity on an area. And when we have learned each other and each other's systems and build up confidence, then you reach a time where you could discuss qualified majority. Point, it takes time. And we have to realize that. And again, I'm back to my basic point. If you look at the past 10 years and see what have been created within the European Union, when you look at things 10 years ago, you could not have foreseen, my guess is that we have reached what we have reached. I'm not saying this is perfect. I'm not saying this is wonderful and magnificent. I'm only saying that it would be a negative picture and not a correct picture of a design of Europe would say we are not able to make decisions, we're not able to tackle crises, we're not able to create a new European currency. We are, and we have done. Secondly, about the institutions, I think to the questionnaire from Financial Times, in the next 2-3 years, we have to discuss the questions you mentioned yourself, and we will certainly do so. We have to say to ourselves, should we involve the national parliaments? Should we do an even more plan than we do today? How should the relationship be between the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers? Could we make more transparency? How could we pursue in a more undramatized way of making decisions? Ordinary people have to see a Europe which are not equal to a picture with black limousines, men coming out of the black limousines going into shuttered, closed doors and coming outside again with a happy message. They have to have chances to engage themselves on solving these issues which you mentioned, which have something to do with their daily life. And I think we have fundamentally to recognize here, you are at the heart of the issue when you talk about popular engagement of ordinary people. Thank you.
Yes. To the issue of legitimacy, I don't think that referendum is the only way to have democratic legitimacy. Because if that was the case, then outside Switzerland, there will be no democratic legitimacy in Europe. So I'm not sure that that's acceptable to all of us and to our own experience. So I'm not very sure that referendums are the only way that people can explain their democratic views. And if we accept that, then it's not also exact that the decision-making in European institutions is not controlled democratically. Every government is weekly answering questions and debates at the national level because of European issues. And the Commission is, Mario Monti is here, but I think it's every month or every 2 weeks answering questions at the European level, or to the European Parliament of the decisions that have been made by the Commission. So there is a lot of democratic debate in Europe. I will certainly compare it with any other system of federal government of 300 million people in wherever you want. I doubt that you will find as much political debate at all levels. It's true that it's not exactly comparable to the United States of Europe, but I'm not sure that it is a political backing for that. So I don't think that it's a lack of legitimacy more than the debate of legitimacy that any democracy has all the time, and that will probably never end. And I don't think that that means that we don't have any legitimacy. That means that we have to be moving to be more transparent, and that's what it's all about. And then a little reflection about majority voting and unanimity. I don't think that it's more than a tool. I mean, it's certainly, we have achieved a lot of things in unanimity, a lot of things, most of them. And we are still doing them. We are closing important deals and tax packages that affect corporate tax, that affect unfair competition, that affect savings, and we have done that with unanimity. I think Prime Minister Amundsen is completely right. Unanimity is the first step, and it stays as long as it's necessary, and we all feel it when it starts not being necessary. When it starts not being necessary, when the process of European integration has been so strong that we have so many common rules that national basic interests are not at stake. So it's true that we, in the WTO, we have a system of, well, not totally majority voting. I mean, there is everything there. And we are able to use it, and I think it's very useful for international position. I have urged in my first intervention that we should be able to move more forcefully forward, but I'm not sure that we should measure European political integration by the fact that income tax is a unanimity vote. I don't think that there is a correlation between saying because income tax is not a unanimity vote, there is not political integration. No, I mean, income tax is not a unanimity vote because people in Europe believe at the moment that their income should be taxed by national considerations. And if you take into consideration that 12 countries of Europe have lost sovereignty over monetary policy, which means currency values and interest rates, well, it makes a little sense to me that at least fiscal policy still is something that people will want to see at the national level.
First on institutions, when I say that I think that the issues are more important for legitimacy for the citizens, and that's why we, for example, have chosen the 3 E's for our presidency: enlargement, employment, environment. That, of course, doesn't mean that I don't find also the institutional debate important. I mean, I do believe in a strong commission, I do believe in transparency, I do believe that we, in a longer-term perspective, or I hope, but at least in the medium-term perspective, also we'll have public debates when we are deciding on legislation in the Council, for example. But I think it's important also to remember that there is not the solution when we come to the institutions, because European Union is a dynamic body and it will continue to be a dynamic body. And I mean, this IGC, next IGC, the second next IGC, no one will be the IGC when we find the perfect solution, and I think we shouldn't try to opt for that. Then concerning the taxation, I can agree also with Rodrigo. I think it's important to remember that when discussing the legitimacy, we also have to take the decisions on the level the citizens want us to decide on. And I doubt it that they would like to see majority voting on taxation in all of Europe. I doubt it if the citizens would like it. I doubt it if the business society would like it. I don't think European Union is there, and I think that has to continue to be a national business. And when we are agreeing with each other, then it's no problem also to have the decision together, because then we can take the decision in the Council. But here I think it would be a danger to try to develop majority voting when people and countries are not ready for it.
Peter, just a word.
Very briefly, first of all, I was not arguing, and certainly business is not arguing, for harmonization of taxes, which in fact would remove tax competition, which would not be good, I think, for anybody, nor is it necessary, nor does it exist even in Switzerland, let alone the United States. So I'm not looking for majority voting there. I don't think it should happen. But what I was trying to make, the point I was trying to make about the rather unedifying spectacle of Nice is demonstrated by one particular point. If you look at the national votes that were agreed for member states afterwards, you find a situation that if population were relevant, Germany would have significantly more votes than France, the UK and Italy. It makes, it seems to me, very little sense to differentiate between the Netherlands and Belgium, which was done, and between Spain and Italy, which was done, but not between France and Germany. This is a type of negotiation that doesn't have inherent consistency. And I don't think even the most fervent advocates of the achievements of Nice would say that it had that degree of coherence.
Just one short.
Yes, Prime Minister Rasmussen.
Peter Sutherland, that's what I'm saying. I take the point. Coherence, no, but decision, yes. I mean, the alternative, I'm very serious here, the alternative would have been a broke down of Nice. And I ask everybody in this room what would have been happening. It's easy to leave the table and say another time, another day, but thinking of the consequences and of the consequences for the enlargement process, I would rather, and I'm sorry to say that, Peter Sutherland, I would rather prefer a picture which is not the most beautiful one you've seen in the world, but yet a picture which gives us the possibility of moving ahead.
Well, we have time for one more question. Yes, please.
Thank you. Charles Grant from a think tank called the Centre for European Reform.
Can you stand up?
Okay. I'd like to address Peter Sutherland. I find Peter's defence of the community method inspiring, and it's very hard to disagree with it. But the EU is moving into new areas: common foreign and security policy, police cooperation, and that, I think, is partly the answer to our American friend here, who maybe still sees the EU as an economic club. It's more than an economic club. And now that it is moving into these new areas, the problem is, how do you get countries with their own strong traditions in foreign policy, like Britain and France, to accept the community method? Only very recently, Britain recognised North Korea, I think, without insulting its community colleagues. They don't have the tradition of acting within a larger framework for foreign policy. So my point to you, Peter, is that if you want to have integration in foreign and defence policy, surely it has to be intergovernmental, at least largely intergovernmental, for quite a while, if you're going to get the big boys to play the game. Otherwise, as during the Bosnia crisis, they will have their own contact groups and act outside the framework of institutions. So I would say, be patient. Maybe in the very long run, we'll go in the way you suggest. And in the medium run, surely we must try and end this ridiculous division between Patton and Solana. We need to find ways of having a single representative for the CFSP, maybe partly in the Commission, partly outside the Commission. Who could that be? We don't know. But that's got to be surely the way forward.
Well, very briefly, in the long run, we're all dead, and we can't wait forever. We might have said the same thing about the internal market. We might have said the same thing about the common currency. I don't mean that it's going to advance dramatically overnight, but I think the structures should not be intergovernmental but supranational. And the only point I would make to the Prime Minister, who fought so valiantly for Europe in his referendum, is I was not arguing that people should have walked away, and I know that many countries who signed up in Nice did so with considerable reservation, but I'm just arguing that next time those who are less forthcoming and less positive and constructive should be more constructive in the common interest.
Well, it is my task to summarize, if that's possible, what we have been listening to. And I think among at least the governmental representative, there was agreement on 5 principles. The first one is that we need pragmatism, that there are concrete issues which must be addressed in a concrete manner. The second is that nevertheless we need common values, and we need to pursue the search for common values. The third is that, contrary to the assessment of the press, the assessment of Nice was B+ and not C-. The results, the student passed the test, not with honor, but with efficiency. The fourth is that though the euro was not mentioned, it is a silent success. And there has been, I think, a tacit agreement that the euro has greatly helped the recovery of European economies. The fifth conclusion is that this is the time to defend the role of the Commission. We have probably the best group of people that we have gathered, and they should be allowed to perform a significant, decisive role. The sixth point which is more mine than the conclusion, is that in our journey to an undefined direction, to take the very poetic phrase of Peter Sutherland, the intergovernmental method will not be enough. It is necessary, it is there, but it has its own limits, and it contradicts the spirit and the values which we are wishing to create. So if we satisfy ourselves with sticking with pure intergovernmental method, we will not reach the ultimate goal which we want to reach. Thank you very much for your attention to this session. Thank you very much for all our speakers.
Coming up, Kansas Governor Bill Graves delivers his annual State of the State